In the studio right now, Ed Gogol with an organization, Final Options Illinois, about death with dignity. And it's a very important issue, I believe. I mean, you want to talk about a free country. You should be free to decide your end of days. You should be free to not live in pain. You should be free not to suffer. Apparently, some people don't believe that. They believe in freedom and liberty, but they want to tell you that you must die in pain. Doesn't make any sense to me. Here to discuss this issue in depth right now is Ed Gogol. And first of all, this is, how did you get involved in this issue?
Well, thank you, Wayne. I'm pretty typical of a lot of people who are activists in the cause. My wife and I had a very dear friend who she'd had Parkinson's for more than 20 years and a lot of other problems, and she just did not want to suffer through the final stages, and she was actually able to hasten her death. But yeah, I mean, if you live long enough, you've had loved ones who've died, and you know that even with the best of palliative care, dying can often be hell. And hell on people who are also not the ones dying, but the ones who have to watch, like you watch the people you love and care about suffer. Yeah, that's true. But I personally believe that what's important is you, the dying person. I mean, if you want to hang on, that should be your choice, and that's precisely what we're all about. We believe that it must become a human right that terminally ill people suffering intolerably have this choice.
And you've had several states that actually do have this choice. You've got Oregon, Washington, Vermont, Montana, for example, have laws, with Oregon being the main state that the model it's modeled with legislation. Talk about these states and what they have to offer and what their laws are like.
So Oregon was the first U.S. state that made this legal. It was in 1994. It's been in effect for 20 years. Basically, if you're terminally ill, two doctors agree that you're terminally ill, you're mentally competent, there's a whole process you have to go through. You have to make multiple requests. There's waiting periods built in. If all of this stuff happens, then the doctor can write you a prescription for medication that you may choose to take. You're not obligated, but you may choose to take to hasten your death. And it's typically a few hundred people a year who go through the process. So the law, this is the law now in Oregon for about 20 years, in Washington State since 2008, Vermont and Montana since 2012, and just now we're incredibly happy about this. But on October 5th, Governor Jerry Brown of California signed a law making this the law in California. The signing statement that he gave was so incredibly profound. He said, "I've listened to the arguments pro and con. I respect them. I don't know how I would feel if I were dying, but I know that I would want this choice, and I wouldn't deny that right to anybody." And that's really what it's about. It's about providing people with a choice.
And I can't imagine anybody being against this. First of all, I find this those who are against it, it's an incredible violation of privacy. That should be a decision made by the individual and their families and the doctor. And for somebody from the outside to say, "I know you're in pain, tough. You're not going to get any help. You're not going to get to go on your own terms," seems like the greatest invasion of privacy and busybodydom that I can imagine. Who are the actual opponents? Is it a religious fundamentalist? Who are the main people fighting against you?
It's two groups. It's one wing of the Catholic Church is opposed to it. They think suffering is good. Suffering can be redemptive, and we okay if that's the way you feel. That's fine.
Suffer on your own, exactly. Who are they to tell you that you should suffer?
Yeah, and then there are some people from the disabled community who are opposed to this, who feel that it will cheapen their lives, and the answer is that it's not. Again, if you look at the experience in Oregon, if you look in other countries, this This is for terminally ill people. It doesn't matter how old you are. It doesn't matter how disabled you are. You don't qualify unless you're terminally ill. And people don't want to die. They're not committing suicide. From a legal point of view, this is not suicide. The laws all say if you take advantage of this, what you're really doing is you're dying of your underlying illness. That's what your death certificate will say, and your life insurance contract is not affected by this. And morally, there's a vast difference between like somebody who's depressed, sometimes, they might be mentally ill, they have everything to live for, and they kill themselves. That's a tragedy. We're talking about somebody who's going to be dying anyway. You're going to be dying soon anyway. You're choosing the manner and the timing of your dying in order to spare yourself all of that final agonizing stages of suffering.
The public, are they on your side with this? The polling I have seen, I see it periodically, and it seems like you've got the wind at your back, and things are people are understanding this more and more.
Yes, exactly. I mean, it's the victory in California just now really shows that there's efforts underway in many states. Here in Illinois, we would like to see an Oregon-style law passed in Illinois. We are working. We are trying hard to grow to get it together so that a push can be made for an Oregon-style law here in Illinois. And
where are you on that effort?
Well, we're not. Good question. We're not sure. We're growing. And again, I would urge people to come to our website. It's finaloptionsillinois.org. If this is a right that you want for yourself and your loved ones, please join us. Drop us an email, get on our list. We're hoping that we're going to be strong enough to mount a credible campaign for this, possibly as early as next year. We look at the campaign for marriage equality. It wasn't fast. It took a big movement, and that's what we're trying to build.
But as part of that movement, we had a lot of lobbyists. We had a lot of high-powered support. How is your support in Springfield? Are there lawmakers that are lining up to create legislation that are looking to champion this? Have you found your champions yet? In Springfield?
Yeah, we've drafted a bill for Illinois, very, very similar to the Oregon law. We are talking with legislators right now. It's early days. Mm-hmm. But
well, what about Bruce Rauner? Do you know where he stands on this? He surprised me in one respect. I've been pretty critical of the governor, but the one thing he's done well, a bill came forward to prohibit conversion therapy, sort of pray away the gay therapy for minors, and he actually passed the legislature, and he signed it in the law, so I'll give him credit for that. So that was a surprise. Maybe he'll surprise you on this issue if it came in front of his desk. Do you have any indication where Governor Rauner stands on this issue?
No, we really don't. One thing I will say, everybody dies, and the support for this often it really crosses party lines. It crosses religious beliefs, etc. We're hopeful. We know, as you say, the wind is at our backs. It is a movement whose time has come. So obviously we'll see. I mean, it may come to some other states before it comes to Illinois, but we're aiming for it.
Yeah, I think a lot of these issues that were once controversial aren't quite as controversial. I'll give you a few examples. You mentioned marriage equality. Another one is marijuana is not as controversial. It's scary as it once was. And I think this is another one, how to die, right to die. Speaking of which, how does the process take place? It's not a Dr. Kevorkian, because I think there's two examples, I think, that come to mind when this issue comes up. One is the Terry Schiavo fiasco in Florida with Governor Jeb Bush at the time about the feeding tube. And the other is Kevorkian. So what is the actual process? If I were terminally ill, what would I do? How would I go about this?
You would start with your doctor. And, of course, your doctor is not obligated to help you. But you would start with your doctor. You might have to search for a doctor. But you would say, Doc, I want this. I'm terminally ill. The doctor has to agree that in their reasonable medical judgment, you have less than 6 months. The doctor has to bring in another doctor to consult who also has to agree that you have less than 6 months in their reasonable judgment. Both of them have to make sure that you're making an informed decision and that you're mentally competent. You understand what you're asking for. If either of them has the slightest doubt that you're not mentally competent, incompetent, they're legally obligated to refer you to a licensed mental health professional for an evaluation. Only if that comes back with that you are okay, then the process can proceed. You have to make 3 separate requests, one in writing. There's 2 separate waiting periods built in. There's a 2-week waiting period and then a final 48-hour waiting period. And if all of this is okay, then finally the doctor can write you a prescription. You or your trusted loved one goes to the pharmacy, fills it, you put the meds on the shelf. Then if and when your suffering becomes intolerable to you, you mix it up, you drink it down, and you're typically asleep in 5-10 minutes. You're typically gone in 30 to 60 minutes.
That's interesting, because if it's really that easy, you wonder, a different issue, the death penalty, why it's so hard, why they keep messing this up, putting inmates to death. And do you have, if it's working that well, what is the compound that's used? Why are there a lot of situations where people do this and then it doesn't work and they wake up, or is it pretty down pat at this point where people know what to do and it's working consistently?
It is down pat, yes. The laws don't specify the means. They basically say the doctor can prescribe medication that you must self-administer. You have to drink it down yourself. Typically in Oregon, it's barbiturates, Seconal or Nembutal. I think, the problem with the executions is that the European companies that make these drugs, they do not want them to be used for executions, and so they're refusing to sell them for that purpose.
Right. You look at the situation you mentioned, 6 months. It seems pretty arbitrary. What if you're not feeling well, you're terminally ill, but it's a year or a year and a half? Does that mean you got to run out the clock and suffer for 6 months just to make it to the final 6?
That's a really good point, and that's a very controversial subject within the cause. From an ethical point of view, I believe that the appropriate criteria, the real criteria for when it should be okay to end your life, to hasten your death, is if you're suffering physically and it's intolerable and irremediable. And sometimes, that can mean that you would like to go while you still while you're not terminal, while you have more than 6 months. But the laws that we've been aiming to get passed in the U.S. all have that 6 month. I think it's a small minority of people who that's a problem. Mm-hmm. And these laws have been crafted very, very carefully to ensure that there really is no coercion, no abuse. And of course, 6 months, it's somewhat subjective, but at least there is, obviously if a doctor is willing to say you have less than 6 months, it means you've got some really, really bad disease. You're clearly ill. You're clearly very, very unlikely to recover.
I'm looking at some of the other nations that are on the list where they have the right to choose how they're going to die, and that is Holland, Belgium, Luxembourg, Switzerland, Colombia. I'm surprised we don't see Norway and Sweden on there. So there's still a lot of work to do internationally.
Yeah, but it is a huge worldwide movement. It's all over. One of the videos that I find most inspiring is from South Africa. It's Archbishop Desmond Tutu, who was so critical to South Africa casting off apartheid. And he just says right out, I support this. People who are doing this, are working for this cause, are doing a wonderful thing. So it's really all over the world. People die all over the world. In a lot of third world countries, though, the challenge is not even so much the right to hasten your death, but it's the right to get palliative care, period. Like in Mexico, it can be very, very hard for people who have cancer to get opiates, for example. So,
well, that's actually a crisis throughout the world. People are so terrified of addiction that they make it very difficult to get opiates. Pain and suffering, most nations don't have anything, or they have very few options. Right, that are legal. Right. So people are even in hospitals. So that is actually a big crisis in our big drug war, our fear of drugs. They've gone too far, in my view, where people who are legitimately in pain aren't getting these the medications they need. But in terms of what you're doing here in Illinois, how do people get involved, and what does that entail? What would you like people to do to move this issue forward right here in Illinois?
Visit us on the web at finaloptionsillinois.org. Drop us an email. Get on our email list. We have a wonderful event coming up a week from this Sunday. It's Sunday, November 1st. It's at 1 o'clock at the Second Unitarian Church on Berry Street in Chicago. It's titled Aid in Dying, the Ultimate Human Right, and we have a panel of speakers, including myself. So come on out and join us, please.
Ed Gogol, president of Final Options Illinois, thank you so much for joining me today on the Wayne Besen Show, and good luck with your work. Consider me a supporter.
Thank you, Wayne. Really appreciate it.
I'll be back in a moment. This is the Wayne Besen Show on Chicago's Progressive Talk, WCPT.
Since I've loved you or anything, how the times have changed. Distorted, a figure set in trend, emotionless, and the words lose all their meaning.
The Wayne Besen Show.